how far back do you go with Spider-Man? When did Spider-Man take over your life and become your number one favorite fan character?
It's hard because I've been I think for a lot of women probably had this experience where comics didn't always feel like the most welcoming space. So when I was very little, I loved Spider-Man. I loved the cartoon. I had an older brother, and so I would like play with his figurines and that kind of thing. And then when you get a little bit older, you start to realize that the comic book stores might not always be the most accessible spaces, but that was where you had to buy your comics. And so there was a disconnect. So I walked away because I found it to be a little intimidating. And then I came back to it as an adult, like probably in my mid-20s or so, early to mid-20s, because of O Comics, actually. And because Marvel created their Marvel Unlimited app, which made it so easy to read everything. Like, I think I read the entirety of Ultimate Spider-Man in, like, 3 weeks.
That sounds like a great 3 weeks.
It was a wonderful 3 weeks. I cried a lot.
The stories do get emotional. Especially in the Ultimate line.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, you mentioned I firmly remember old enough. I'm old enough to remember when geek culture wasn't mainstream, and you literally were ostracized for loving the thing that now everyone loves. There's no shame in saying I like Star Wars. Like, yeah, of course, you're part of the United States, right? We all like that. Was there ever a time when that was not cool? Yeah.
I mean, my family are all nerds. Like I've done a lot of like, interviews and podcasts now about Star Wars because of the books, and the question always comes up of like what's your earliest memory of Star Wars? Like do you remember how it felt watching the movies? And I'm always like, no, like I don't have a recollection of watching the movies for the first time because it's always been there. Like, I wish I could remember learning like what it felt like to see the reveal of Vader and Luke, but it's just like always been in my life. It's always been a part of it. So I can't even disconnect the two. And I went to a nerd school. Like I went to a magnet program when I was in high school. So I already wasn't cool. So it was like, okay. Like the things you like because you're already never going to be the like really cool popular person.
Would you feel like comic culture is getting, obviously there's a long way to go. We've all read stories of toxic fandom and some of the terrible things that happens online, but people online are just in general terrible. Do you find that comic culture and geek culture is becoming more welcoming?
It's a tough question because I think that there is a desire for it to be more inclusive, and you can see it in the very, very small way in which we're getting new perspectives writing these stories. And I say small because it is, you look at who is allowed to write the stories, and it is still very much like, oh, you're a Pulitzer Prize winner. Here, you can write Black Panther. It's like the barrier to entry is still pretty high. But I do think that because of the internet, we've allowed pockets of very welcoming and very inclusive fandoms to exist, which is really awesome. Like you can find people like you who like the things you do instead of having to be in a situation where you feel like you're the isolated person. So like I can find Desi Geek Girls is a perfect example. It started because me and my friend Swapna Krishna were both super into Star Wars. Like that's kind of how our friendship started, was being like kind of embarrassingly into Star Wars and like looking at the Force Awakens trailer frame by frame, trying to figure out like whose hand was holding the lightsaber. And we were like, man, I wish there was more space for like South Asian women in geekdom and what that looks like. And so we started Desi Geek Girls, and there are a ton of us. There's so many of us. It's just like having the access to those spaces, and the internet has allowed for that, which I think is amazing.